There's a lot of discussion in the air about Animal Crossing, and while I mostly sidestep the rumour mill except for that brief period in January where Switch 2 rumours ate the internet whole, I've been meaning to deep dive Animal Crossing's potential future on Switch 2 for a while, and this seems a good a moment as any. I've alluded to my broad expectations on a new game a couple of times previously, and my overall view remains that the game won't be released until a low-cost version of the Switch 2 system comes along, assuming they maintain the one island per system restriction. But I always think it's interesting to take these propositions and stress test what the rationale could be if they were to be releasing Animal Crossing much sooner. To do this, we need to consider Animal Crossing's position in the constellation of Nintendo Switch 2's business strategy, the technological changes that Animal Crossing may adopt going forward as it moves to the Switch 2 system, and how it fits into the future of the system and of Nintendo's plans. And one flaw in my logic of looking at the one console per system limitation as a key factor could be the emergence of game share. Now, game share with Animal Crossing is an odd one. It's difficult to imagine that game share could be very satisfying for people when the titles are played in 2-week blocks, and Animal Crossing is designed to encourage people back again and again. It's not the sort of game where you expect to be going out of it for long periods, even though people do. Nevertheless, if they wanted to push game chat and game share in a major way, Animal Crossing does make perfect sense as a game to do it, and sharing access to the game would allow people to try their own islands. If Nintendo are smart about converting people from triers into buyers, then it could work out well for them. I don't happen to think that this game is the best option for them to be promoting game share with, but it's worth considering, and I'll cycle back to the fuller range of possibilities later in the video. Additionally then, let's look at what we know about the next 2 years for Nintendo. Punctuating their game release schedule are two massive films, the second Mario movie and the first Zelda film. Now, it's possible one or both could turn out to be massive flops, of course, but Nintendo will be proceeding as if they won't, and they will want to make sure that they are lining up their IP releases to focus on these franchises significantly. The Christmas after the first Mario movie saw 4 Mario titles release on Switch, although to be fair, the 3DS had 4 Mario games in both 2016 and 2017, so there is an argument that this reflects Nintendo's late-stage console strategy more than anything in response to the movie. Nevertheless, we don't need to go far to see the contours of a similar strategy for Zelda, with Nintendo Switch 2 editions of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, the new Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment game, and probably more besides in the future, as well as lots of Switch games which have been glossed up for the new machine. Now, Nintendo can walk and chew gum at the same time. The original Age of Calamity launched in the middle of the Mario 35th anniversary season after all, but I think with their absolutely mammoth games, they like to carve out a little bit of space around it for publicity. However, 2026 has another major event for Nintendo to consider, and that is the 30th anniversary of the Pokemon series. The Pokemon Company like an anniversary, and it's difficult to imagine that we won't get a fairly major push for Pokemon over the course of that year. Now, the Pokemon Company are operationally independent, but they will at least wish to coordinate with Nintendo, especially when it comes to big titles. All of this, I feel, creates an atmosphere where it may be difficult to really focus on Animal Crossing to the extent it needs to launch. Difficult, but not impossible, of course. A high-profile movie like either of the films they've got on the slate might be exactly the location to cross-advertise the return of the pandemic era's favourite pastime, and to some degree it does depend on how they position their Zelda focus. If they choose to have the next significant Zelda title in 2027, either alongside or following up the movie, then the summer of 2026 becomes a little bit freer. Instinctively as well, I look at Tomodachi Life and think, are these two games spiritually quite close in terms of the kinds of audiences they're appealing to? Is there a risk that releasing Animal Crossing will simply squash attention for Tomodachi Life, which we know from the 3DS has quite significant sales potential? But then again, I remember Nintendo releasing new Super Mario Bros. U and Yoshi's Crafted World within weeks of each other, two 2D platformers using similar kinds of characters, and they put out 3 Mario RPGs in barely more than a year towards the end of the Switch's life. Even on Switch 2, people have remarked that they're following up Mario Kart World with another racer in Kirby Air Riders soon after. They do seem curiously apathetic about genre clashes in their game lineups. Still, from Tomodachi to the busy schedule to the potential to the game to shift Switch 2 Lite consoles, there are enough reasons that I would instinctively think it unlikely, and I'll put numbers to this before the end of the video, but for now let's just say unlikely, that we will have an Animal Crossing title before 2027. However, I think there are other considerations to take into account. For one thing, we know that the Animal Crossing New Horizons development team had significant overlap with Splatoon 2's, not in terms of the very core team, of course, but in terms of most of the wider staff members, particularly on art roles and so on. As I've covered before, Splatoon 3 had much less overlap with Animal Crossing New Horizons, though, and I think it stands to reason that as time goes on, Nintendo will want to funnel some of the considerable money earned by Animal Crossing New Horizons back into EPT5 so that Splatoon and Animal Crossing can be developed independently. This, in theory, means that a major Splatoon and a major Animal Crossing could release concurrently, and we saw an example in 2023 of where EPD10, who once had to shuffle between Pikmin and Super Mario Bros. Titles, managed to put out both titles in the space of a few months in 2023. Especially if the Splatoon Raiders team is not the totality of the Splatoon development group, but the title is supported heavily by smaller groups, perhaps with some outside help, shades of 18's contribution to Pikmin 4 perhaps, then having concurrent Animal Crossing and Splatoon releases around 2026 seems not just possible, but in certain respects plausible. We can possibly expect that the development of the new Animal Crossing started after the last major Animal Crossing New Horizon update in 2021, so we're already going to be 4 years into development. Well, Animal Crossing New Horizons itself was famous for following an 8-year wait for a new Animal Crossing game, but this is a bit misleading. Animal Crossing New Leaf released in November of 2012, so for one thing, it's closer to 7 years than 8 years for New Horizons to appear in March 2020, and then the devs were on board Happy Home Design and supporting with the Animal Crossing Amiibo Festival game, and of course a good deal of the team went on to Splatoon and then Splatoon 2. In reality, it's likely that a core team was building mechanics for New Horizons throughout this period, but it was only in full development from 2017 after Splatoon 2 landed. A comparison here has to be Mario Kart. Mario Kart 8 was released quite soon after Mario Kart 7, not quite 2.5 years later. Sure, the game was expanded a lot with DLC, then Deluxe, then the team went and made Tour, and then Tour and other content was cannibalized back into Mario Kart 8 Deluxe for the Booster Course Pass. Quite a long run. But in terms of development on Mario Kart World itself, it seems that this began around 2017 for an 8-year development period. And what do we get for that development? Well, they mainly focused not on drastically changing the mechanics, but cracking open the scale and scope of the experience. I would expect to see similar things with Animal Crossing because it does have some logistical issues. For one thing, the series has until now used a fixed camera viewpoint, and this does have benefits. The fact is, the back of many of the assets aren't even designed because they don't need to exist, and I'm sure this saves a good deal of processing. However, an obvious step forward for Animal Crossing would be to consider a more immersive, fully 3D environment with the potential to rotate the character and follow players in 3D spaces. This has difficulties, not just in terms of processing power, but on the whole feel of the game, which flows from the fixed camera and increasingly from the cylindrical game surface. On the other hand, the kinds of activities Nintendo will want Animal Crossing to be used for: a hub for social meetings, for people to take in-game photographs to share on social media, and so on. Well, these possibilities amplify considerably with the addition of more dimensions. In many ways, this to Animal Crossing would be like the open world is to Mario Kart, a major innovation that would take the franchise forward. I have to say, though, upon looking into it, it doesn't appear that the technical limitations or even aesthetic requirements have caused the cylindrical world to be initiated, with producer Katsuya Iguchi telling IGN in 2005 of the DS Animal Crossing title, "The reason we went with the rolling log effect, what they call the cylindrical world, is if you look at the top of the screen, that's the sky, and it makes more sense to do this effect than using the scrolling camera since the sky is on top. In the GameCube version, there were balloons that floated around the sky, and you'll be able to see these on the Nintendo DS version as they float up in the sky. And the pelican that delivers the mail, players will be able to shoot him down and make him drop his mail. At night, stars will appear, and you'll be able to connect the stars and create constellations for your village." End quote. All admirable reasons for wishing the players to be able to see the sky a bit more clearly, but ones that feel very much grounded in the thought process of 2005. The fact is, with a more game-literate gaming public and a better ability to show shadows and subtle lighting effects, it seems to me that a change in the camera system is probably actually overdue. Pikmin 4 had some success by putting the camera much closer to the players, and I think there has to be at least a 50% chance that we will see a free-to-control camera in the next Animal Crossing game, even though I anticipate that some people might feel that this undermines the series' innate charm. Another surefire thing to include is people being able to traverse from village to village. This has always been possible by train or plane, but I'm reminded of the wish from the Tears of the Kingdom developers to create a sense of seamlessness, a sense that is matched in the design choices that seem to underpin Mario Kart World. If this sense of open, seamless gameplay is good enough for these major franchises, why not Animal Crossing? Of course, towns would still need fixed areas, but what if it were possible to have more than one town, perhaps even 8 towns on a single vast map? Why 8, you might say? 8 maximum users for a Nintendo account family group. This would solve the one town per console limitation in a snap, as it will be possible for couples or families to share a single game. It would even be possible to use Game Share to allow different people to be working on different parts of their town or different towns concurrently from the same game. Now, evidently, there is a risk for Nintendo here in terms of sales. Animal Crossing New Horizons got a significant sales boost, I'm sure, from the fact that people wanted their own game and their own system, even within families. It was a core plank of their strategy to turn Switch from a one per household machine to a multiple machine per household proposition. Removing this facility seemingly jeopardizes Nintendo's chances of repeating this sales success again. But does it? After all, Nintendo do have a cheaper system that they are looking to sell all the same, and it's a system which frankly has far better margins for them than the Switch 2 seems to have right now, and that is the classic Switch OLED. If they wanted a late-in-life fillip to an aging system, and the evidence of DSi, Game Boy Micro, the new 2DS XL, and others suggest that they're very happy to keep their aging hardware ticking along far past the point where it seems like the shiny new thing is over the horizon, then promoting Game Share and the purposes of the original Switch is a pretty good strategy. Because here's what's great about it for Nintendo. Yes, you can play Animal Crossing with a Switch, but you need a Switch 2 as a hub machine. That's the bit you can't get away from. It's a perfect way to make Switch 2 the obvious complement to people's existing array of Switch systems, a family machine that serves as a point of connection. It also simultaneously makes the appeal of Switch 2 Lite going forward for an independent Animal Crossing player that much greater, especially if the Lite follows only a short while after. But for the time being, getting people to see Switch 2 as a natural step requires a massive, massive game, and Animal Crossing could easily be that title. But is there any precedent of Nintendo basically surrendering sales as a loss leader on a broader strategy? I would suggest yes, there is. Mario Kart Worlds bundle at an effective $50 was clearly positioned to sweeten the deal for potential Switch 2 owners. Kart is a huge title, but selling the console was a bigger priority for Nintendo. Animal Crossing New Horizons' own Happy Home Paradise DLC was also used in a similar manner. It was basically, air quotes, free to anyone who hopped on board the expansion pack. Of course, the expansion pack itself was quite pricey, and over the course of years, they surely earned significantly more from having players on the expansion pack than they would have done selling the DLC individually. And then Nintendo sweetened the deal with the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass to not just bring people in, but keep them playing on the expansion pack for the years that followed. All things considered, therefore, I can see Nintendo deciding that if they want to make everybody know about GameShare, then they could do it using the popularity of Animal Crossing, and frankly, in an age where Nintendo has received some flack for being cold-hearted and greedy, the potential of GameShare to offer value to families is tremendous. Remember Iwata's observation that gaming can actually do quite well during a market downturn, as it's cheaper as a form of entertainment than many others that families may consider. That's truer now than ever, and if they can utilize Animal Crossing in this way, it would be a great showcase for how they can sell a game that is high priced, but still make many people feel comfortable and not simply exploited by the $80 purchase. Let's anticipate that Switch 2 Lite then is destined for 2027 or 2028, the same kind of time horizon that we had between Switch and Switch Lite. If they release Animal Crossing about 6 to 12 months prior, this gives Nintendo multiple bites of the cherry of using Animal Crossing as a system seller. The first wave players will be sinking what I'm sure 90% will be $80 into Animal Crossing, and a good portion of the most dedicated players, the early adopters, will surely buy a Switch 2 alongside, especially if it's a special edition Animal Crossing model. It seems inconceivable to me that the current pure black look of the console can sustain for too long before they try to inject a bit of colour into it, and especially with a game built around customization and decoration, this might be an opportunity to sell new Joy-Con and a new console aesthetic. But even then, they get a second go the following year, selling Animal Crossing alongside or even bundled with a Switch 2 Lite. However, there are other potential possibilities for Animal Crossing as well. Nintendo have experimented a fair bit recently with smart device apps such as Zelda Notes and Nintendo Today and Nintendo Music, but is it possible that they could link Animal Crossing to its own app? Now, personally, I rather hope not, as I'm a massive skeptic of smartphones in general, but it seems at least plausible that by shutting down Animal Crossing Pocket Camp, they're preparing the way for an integrated Animal Crossing experience that crosses both game and app, allowing you, in theory at least, to check into your island and do certain limited activities from your phone when you're out and about. It really seems to be a huge push for Nintendo this last year or so, more than ever, to get onto people's phones and to become a habit-forming part of people's daily lives. And so I think a concurrent Animal Crossing app alongside the game has to be at least a 30% chance for the launch window of the next title. I certainly can't see Nintendo repeating the Pocket Camp approach of simply having something that's utterly separate. The whole point of Nintendo's current strategy is integrative, using different planks of their offerings to draw people in to their hardware, software propositions. However, I don't think smartphones are the only option for this. It's always occurred to me as well that Animal Crossing would be the absolutely perfect game to play in conjunction with a Nintendo smartwatch. Smartwatch tech is now what could be considered wither technology, and Nintendo has both long experience of using watches with the Game & Watch series and recent experience of designing clock interfaces with Alarmo. A watch which you can use as a window onto your island seems like both a fashion statement and a discussion point. Of course, the functionality will be limited, but I think Nintendo does realise that some of its time-bound features on Animal Crossing don't always fit the loosey-goosey play-your-way philosophy that they've embraced in recent times. Animal Crossing director Aya Kyogoku commented back in the Iwata Asks for New Leaf that I would often come home late from work only to find that Tom Nook's shop was closed. I wondered if we could make it so the game adjusted itself to the player's circumstances, meaning that players wouldn't need to adjust the clock. But if all the shops were open 24 hours a day, there would be no difference between the day and night, defeating the whole point of having time in sync with the real world. Anyway, we put that problem on hold for a while, and then the idea of the player becoming the mayor was raised, and it occurred to us that the player could use his or her authority to adjust business hours. The mayor has the authority to decide these kinds of rules and regulations. End quote. Now, this led to an elegant solution for New Leaf, but I think there are other potential solutions as well, such as permitting people to do remote shopping at Tom Nook's store during the day from their app or from their watch. Of course, a smartwatch device has a lot more capability for play than Animal Crossing. The revival of Tamagotchis in recent years makes Nintendogs a surefire winner for such a gaming watch, I would imagine. Built-in NFC capabilities also would allow you to do cool things with Amiibo and Joy-Con, and some of the health tech that Nintendo has used with Ring Fit Adventure, such as heartbeat tracking, could also be added in to create a multifunctional second-string platform of sorts. Now, all that said, I'm not sure that I think the time for such a device is now. Nintendo could sell Alamo a few months before Switch 2 because it was a small-scale, gimmicky run. But while there are inexpensive smartwatches on the market, I imagine that Nintendo would want this thing to retail for at least $100, if not significantly more. And there's a risk that doing this alongside Switch 2, which in itself is costly, would cut the legs out of the market for such ventures. I've covered a smartwatch idea in more detail previously though, so I'll refer people at the end of this to my previous thoughts on the subject. At any rate, I wouldn't rule it out, though it feels like a longer shot at present. So all things considered, have I come round to the idea of a 2026 Animal Crossing release? Well, maybe. All the stuff I said at the start, that still rings true to me. Moreover, developing games takes time, and developing what would surely be the hugest Animal Crossing game yet, something similarly huge in terms of scope to what Mario Kart World was for the Mario Kart series, risks taking even longer. EPD5 have proven that they can be quite quick off the mark before, but often this is from being fairly limited in their scope. Splatoons 2 and 3 were iterative in lots of ways, and many New Leaf fans felt that New Horizons was just parceling out stuff they already had on 3DS in smaller chunks for a good duration of its lifespan. Now, Nintendo could get away with that in Splatoon 3 as it was a later in life title, and for Animal Crossing New Horizons because most of the install base wouldn't have played New Leaf, though of course a significant fraction, potentially around a quarter, and a higher number of the initial play base I'm sure, would have done so. But New Horizons was a proper phenomenon. They can't come back with something that feels like a poor relation of a title that's gone before. This doesn't mean that Nintendo can't hold some things back. The seasonal structure of the game basically makes this acceptable and even necessary, but it will need to feel very fully developed even on day one. And one key aspect of this will be the level of dialogue. Having 8 personality types seems potentially problematic to me if people have already got used to these already, and if people start visiting other islands more. I suspect that Nintendo may wish to borrow from the Fujibayashi approach of having multiplicative factors so that there are other factors that influence the reactions of the characters, whether it be time of day, their species, or a different criteria, making for effectively many more than just the base 8 personality types, where repeating dialogue does become a potential risk if you end up with too many villagers of a similar sort. But as great as this would be, it would mean a lot of writing of different scenarios and a huge amount of testing to make sure this works, and not just in one language either. The translation requirements on this game will be absolutely enormous, and yet this isn't like Metroid Prime Remastered or Advance Wars, where Nintendo can do little tweaks for how and when they drop in each region. This game needs to be a global release of some considerable scale. I would argue the text requirements of the game will probably be many times greater than anything Nintendo has seen before, perhaps even more than Fire Emblem and Xenoblade. Now, this in itself is manageable. There are companies whose entire job it is to provide additional text for games, and it wouldn't surprise me if at least one of them has been working flat out on Animal Crossing for a good couple of years at least. But translation and editing that goes around it, well, that's a big, big deal. In one sense, it's why I find an Animal Crossing game a very believable leak, because it strikes me that there are so many potential places for this news to leak from, given the requirements for lots of people being involved. And because Nintendo are famously leak averse, it also makes sense for them to anticipate that jeopardy and announce a game sooner. Animal Crossing is pure hype and would certainly bring in at least a few players to Switch 2. Splatoon 3 had an 18-month hype window, and so if this is a holiday 2026 game, then it would certainly be an impressive choice. Even if it turns out to be a longer wait, well, heck, there still is plenty of precedent. Even if you chalk up the long wait for Metroid Prime 4 Beyond as a mistake from announcing too early, they knew that Tears of the Kingdom would be a long development cycle, even from their E3 2019 announcement. Now, granted, because of COVID, they didn't expect it to be quite so long, and perhaps in 2019 they were cautious after the previous year's Direct was followed by a share price dip, and so they wanted to make sure, belt and braces, that they had a strong showing for that year, especially since they actually had already announced most of their big titles for 2019 and early 2020. I don't know that a similar pressure exists for Nintendo right now, though. I also don't know that they need to have people talking about Animal Crossing when their merchandising for the franchise seems to be at an all-time low. And even though these people could be converted into Switch 2 owners, for one thing, Switch 2 still seems to be selling very nicely, and for another, this is a more casual audience anyway in the main, who will be better served by buying the system a little later. Right now, Nintendo want people who will be buying loads of games because they don't have the install base to shift loads of games if the choosier people are buying all the Switch 2s. Someone who will play thousands of hours of Animal Crossing but not much else is not as attractive a prospect for them at this time as someone who will play a wide variety of different titles. We also have to consider that Nintendo games generally take longer than anyone expects to develop. Mario Kart took seemingly 11 years, Super Mario Bros. 11 years, The Last Zelda over 6 years, and I know, of course, that they weren't in full development for this entire time, but I'm sure there were ideas being developed during these periods. Now, it's rare for Nintendo to produce games faster than previous generations, and especially when they're aiming for generation-defining content. Now, I've explained why the unique configuration of EPT5 shows that this is potentially plausible, as the Splatoon and Animal Crossing divisions are swelling and separating, but I think it's not just that Nintendo want to zip to the finish line. Having set the expectation that a new Animal Crossing may not come until 2028, it gives Nintendo the time to focus on getting this one right, and only then will they get their major wham moment from Animal Crossing. If the first year of Switch 2 is about building Mario with the Mario Anniversary and Mario Kart World and potentially the hype for a new 3D Mario, the second year could be about Zelda building up to the Zelda movie. So why not make the third year about Animal Crossing building up to the release of the Switch 2 Lite and, who knows, perhaps some kind of audiovisual tie-ins such as a video series or even a film. The franchise more than justifies it, and indeed it's been an anime film before now. And if they want to take their time, they will also want to keep their powder dry on an announcement to allow the developers to work in peace. My central expectation, therefore, remains 2027 to 2028 for the launch of the next game. I think 50% will see a game in that period. I'd say a slot before feels like a 30% likelihood to me, not because it's illogical, but just because there's so much to corral at this point. Of course, this doesn't mean that it's impossible for Nintendo to start building up other options such as spin-offs, but for now I expect their best bet is to dovetail an announcement roughly with the release of Tomodachi Life, so that people who are interested in the game have another similar genre game to tempt them back to their Switches in anticipation of the big new Animal Crossing. At this point, therefore, an announcement feels to me to be premature, but then again, Nintendo has really been ticking off their big franchises for Switch too. Mario, Zelda, Metroid, Kirby, and recently Splatoon, and so getting some Animal Crossing love wouldn't be completely surprising. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like, subscribe or check out the Patreon, I'd massively appreciate it, but otherwise I'm grateful you're here, and I'll see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.